Issue 172. We start out right away with Amy attacking Fiona, calling her a cheater. She's literally never had a friendship moment with Amy aside from one group thing, by the way. They really didn't care with this character. This would feel a lot more emotionally impactful if she ever showed any indication that they were friends before and there's a genuine friendship that's been destroyed by this. Instead, she's always felt like a stranger who just happens to be with the freedom fighters. Fiona plays dumb after fortunately Amy somehow missed with her hammer, and Amy explains that she was looking for Sonic and found Tails instead. She asked if he knew where Sonic was, and that's when Tails told her about what Sleuth blackmailed Fiona with. First off, he didn't blackmail her. He didn't get her to do anything. He just snarked that she was a traitor too. That's it. And second, Tails won't tell his best friend who he wants to stop dating Fiona about this, but he'll tell Amy of all people? And third, I guess that provides an explanation for why Fiona would have anything against Tails. Keep that in mind. She would view him as betraying her trust by letting out that secret. She probably views him as a traitor for this, and the way he's drawn here certainly makes him look like one. Of course, he should be more loyal to Amy than Fiona, but still. What if things went by differently because he didn't wreck Amy's trust in her like this? It was already bad enough Sally lost trust in her, and then Sonic got suspicious of all her disappearances. When Amy says she knows the truth, that Fiona has been dating Scourge, Fiona points out it's not like Sonic and I were seriously going out. She's right. I pointed out earlier, but as Sonic said, we're young, there's no rush. It was just a casual relationship. The two were lonely and wanted to have a good time. And they made it pretty clear that Sonic was still pining for Sally, even singing about her with a guitar. It was just using Fiona to distract himself from her. You could tell because he kind of acted like a sleazy Casanova with her, what with the smirks and all. So Sonic never really loved her anyways. And with this revelation combined with the fact that she started dating Sonic after Scourge flirted with all the girls, it's obvious even before she explains it later that she got interested in Scourge, not Sonic. She naturally wanted to go with Sonic instead because she was a freedom fighter not wanting to lose her only supportive group of friends, and because he's very similar to him already. But Scourge was the one she was really interested in. So is the comic gonna show me how that interest first appeared? Nope, because that would be interesting. Fiona then tells her resentful due to her behavior towards her that even if Amy got all of not able to testify against her, Sonic would never believe her. She's pretty overconfident and stupid here, since it should be obvious her disappearances would be making Sonic suspicious. If she had just kept the disappearances to night, fine, but Scourge isn't exactly nocturnal. Then right after Fiona says this, Sonic says, having listened in, that's not saying much. I take everything Amy says with a shaker of salt. This panel really highlights a change in how Sonic and Amy interact. Remember when Sonic really liked Amy? He was calling her his biggest fan and even sat beside her telling her stories about his past adventures. But ever since she got her modern design, he's ignored her and now he has no respect for her whatsoever. You'd think it'd be the exact opposite since now she's actually competent and should have earned his respect. But instead, no, because we gotta have it be exactly like the games. I guess their unique dynamic from the games has some value, but it's not original. As Fiona walks away with her eyes closed, Sonic reassures Amy with his hand on her shoulder that he's been meaning to talk to Fiona anyways, and thanks her for looking out for him. He doesn't even try to learn about what Amy was trying to say, which is especially weird since she was going to tell him about what Tails told her. We see Amy looking love-struck at the way she was treated, and Tails looking worried. Sonic then says to Fiona, you've been disappearing a lot lately. With your sketchy past, that kinda makes me wonder, you know? And while he's accidentally right, saying this was the straw that broke the camel's back for her. He should have phrased that second sentence a lot better and instead told her about where it came from. Scourge. Saying she was cheating on him with him. Instead, out of context, it makes him sound like he's being judgmental of her for being a former criminal, which is exactly the kind of thing that is begging to turn outcasts like her against heroes like him. It completely contradicts his earlier accepting behavior of her. Although now that I've read the comic up to this point, I know that this was foreshadowed, as when she said Scourge was lying to him earlier, he looked very suspicious afterwards. And there's no way an outcast like Fiona didn't catch that, and figure that she was on her way out anyways, might as well give up. Even though Fiona is disappearing with a criminal, psychologically it makes sense that she'd feel bad about her friend just assuming that so easily when he was accepting of her before. She says, you said you were cool with my past. And then Sonic says a pretty dick-headed line that really stands out to me and it's out of character. I'm not cool with how it might be affecting the now. I mean, he starts out saying, I am. Blatant lie there, either that or he's kidding himself. His expression is probably being interpreted by her as high and mighty and condescending, which doesn't make the hero Sonic look particularly enticing to her as an option. And yes, the past is affecting the now, in the sense that it made her more likely to go hang out with Scourge, because being a criminal was already familiar to her. But it's possible she would have done that anyways as an experiment. Fiona angrily reminds Sonic when she helped stop Bean and Bark on his birthday, and then when she gave up everything she knew in Rouge. Sonic acknowledges that she has helped him out. Less than 10 times as far as we know, but still. And then Sonic tells her suspiciously that she hasn't shown any interest in him until after Scourge impersonated him. And Fiona has an expression that implies she's learning about this for the first time, looking away from him so it's implied that it's a genuine reaction on her part. It's possible that she didn't even know about this detail at first and genuinely thought she was interested in Sonic. It makes sense, Sonic and Scourge looked exactly alike back then, so her brain would get the wires crossed pretty easily and make her react to Sonic with the same attraction she got from his lookalike. Sonic tells her as Tails flies over her head looking worried that he trusts Amy and Tails. Fiona solidly becomes unlikable at this point as she tries to discredit them as just kids who shouldn't be trusted over her. It's at this point where she's written as a full-on one-dimensional villain. This has to be a desperate last resort trying to postpone admitting he's right, because she should know this isn't gonna work and it's just making herself look bad. Sonic says, I want to trust you too, Fee. I just need you to clear this up for me. I like that he said this, at least. It makes it clear that he is in the right here. He's just not the most articulate at conveying it. Fiona then says, I tried the hero thing, Sonic. I really did. I stuck to it for you. I thought we could maybe find some middle ground. So she wavered, but stuck to it for him. Wavered when Scourge flirted with her? So did she find out Scourge wasn't really Sonic right away and kept it secret? I sure wish I got to see that. We're not shown her side of the story at all, not even some interesting showing of her adventures with Scourge, seeing them get to know each other and get closer together. It's boring. Finally, Scourge shows up, saying she means she wished you had a backbone, moron. If only she got to elaborate on that more to intelligently articulate her problem with him better. I mean, backbone doesn't immediately translate to not a hero, and she should know that. Knuckles clearly has one. I think her problem with him is that he just lets Sally and other authority figures tell him what to do all the time instead of being more independent, going his own way. You know, like she used to get to do, feeling like she had more freedom that way. You'd think a hero supporting freedom so much would want it. And more importantly, he hasn't just killed Eggman and freed the world of him already, which would be much more effective heroism-wise and be doing the right thing. If he's worried about people knowing it was him being uncomfortable, he could do it when no one's there to witness it. Instead, he sticks to trying to fight him the purely righteous good, pure good way, which obviously doesn't work as well. But is she allowed to explain this by the writer? No! Instead, she looks like a cardboard villain when she was given no indication of hating heroism in general, even furiously showing hatred of Robotnik wasting his life with villainy at one point. We never got to see her thoughts about heroism in particular. She just started to disappear after Sonic looked suspicious of her. All for the sake of a wow, bam, plot twist. It's almost no better than Merlina becoming a villain in Black Knight. It's so one-sided. But for a villain, that's not good writing. That's not as interesting as better explaining their actual motive. Instead, to the less astute reader, this Fiona betrayal comes out of nowhere because she had gotten over her past and become a freedom fighter, and then suddenly Scourge. I do like how she says, hey sweetie. It's sweet that Scourge lets her call him that in particular instead of being embarrassed because he wants to look like a bad boy instead of a softie. Scourge calls her an affectionate term right back, saying, hey babe, and confirms that Fiona did fall for him first. Scourge then says that after Fiona tried to find the same attraction in Sonic, as he put it, I told her it was a waste of time. Any guy after me is gonna be bland. So one, this reveals she told him about this decision because he came back to come and flirt with her later, as opposed to flirting with any other girls. Even though she wasn't his girlfriend at the time and only started after Scourge. And Scourge, unless she let it slip out somehow that she used to be a criminal, had no way of knowing she was most likely to join in on his criminal activity. So he couldn't have been coming back to her specifically just because she was Sonic's girlfriend, because she hadn't started being that yet. She was just another one of the single girls. And he probably didn't know she used to be a criminal. Why would she tell him that? Especially the first time, she would have assumed he already knew. So the only logical explanation is that he sincerely found Fiona the most appealing out of all the girls he flirted with. Other than Mina, his first choice chose Ash over him. It wasn't an act. There was no plan to spite Sonic, because he didn't even know he'd be spiting Sonic to that extent until Fiona told him that she would start dating Sonic. And second, it makes sense that Scourge says anyone after him would be blamed, because I'm sure Sonic would say the same thing with his confidence. Now the next panel is confusing. As Fiona hugs Scourge from the side and he hugs back, Scourge says, "You couldn't win over my girl," and Amy. What about Amy? It's annoying that he doesn't finish that sentence. He taunts him about his love life again, which he must have found out from Fiona. You'd think when he showed knowledge of his bad luck with the girls earlier on, Sonic would have immediately figured out that someone he knew told him about that. Because how would he know? That was just another thing to add to his suspicion, I guess. And Fiona says, "I was hoping you'd be just as much fun, but you're hung up on the whole virtuous hero thing." Again, this line is pretty poorly written because she doesn't explain anything. We never see her having any sort of fun with Scourge, not even in a flashback before this panel. And we never see her having any sort of problem with Sonic being a hero, fighting the man in the same evil position as the one who locked her away in a cell for 2 years. Logically, she'd hate Eggman Robotnik with even more of a fiery, bitter personal grudge than Sonic would because of what Robotnik did to her. So really, she can't be opposed to him fighting Eggman. What is she opposed to about the heroic lifestyle then? The backbone thing? He was accepting of her past until he was given a reason to be suspicious of her. It's just really annoying because they want it to be a plot twist so badly that it comes off as a diabolical ex machina. I get it, she's a former criminal, but that never mattered until now. Then Tails rushes in crying while Scourge and Fiona look surprised, just like Sonic, and he begs her not to go with Scourge, showing faith in her idealistically, just because he's in love with her. I don't think she had to try a little harder. She was doing perfectly fine until Scourge came along, and almost all of the same traits she liked about Sonic were in him, I can only assume. And this is when Fiona basically crosses the moral event horizon. She says that he can't count on anybody, and then she slaps him. Since she already said that line instead of saying it while doing the action was clearly just for emphasis, but it was entirely unnecessary. Although I don't think she thought that at the time. Think about this from her point of view. She's making a huge life-changing decision for a future with Scourge that could have big consequences. That's going to cause anyone some stress, and that stress would involve her worrying, since she's shown herself to be the cautious type. That stress would involve her worrying that taking such a risk could be a big mistake. She doesn't want anyone telling her that right now, because in her mind, for all she knows, leaving Scourge would also be a big mistake. Besides, she couldn't possibly go back now, could she? Even if she chose not to go with Scourge when she almost did, the freedom fighter's trust in her would be shattered and she'd be treated like an outcast. She'd lose her relationship with the closest person she has to Scourge, so there goes that. Amy hates her, Sally hates her, and Sonic hates her. They're not going to keep her doing something like this a secret when she doesn't really deserve it. So she doesn't want to go back to the heroes now and have to deal with all that judgment, which she would view as a huge punishment for doing the right thing when she could avoid even more outcast disapproval and goes with someone who likes her for her past. Something that she would infinitely appreciate. It's almost too good to be true after the way she was treated like scum by Sally. She's under a lot of pressure making a scary decision and took it out on Tails because she wanted him to leave her alone. And he wouldn't do that through reason, obviously. Through Fiona's paranoid, trust, and abandonment issues-filled mindset, Scourge looks like the open-minded contrast to the self-righteous hero who accepts her for who she is. That means everything to an outcast. And even though Sally was the only person who technically talked to her and glared at her like she didn't trust her anymore, to an outcast's mind, she was echoing the sentiments of everyone else in the room. Sonic standing up for her was regarded as the exception. It would have been different if literally everyone stood up for her, but instead, there was silence from them, which is more than enough for the mind of an outcast to think that they all agreed with Sally. Who would want to stay in a group of people that they don't feel like they belong in? At least with Scourge, he'd make her feel like she belonged, and to an outcast who just wants a source of love and support when she never got any parents to give it to her, that would mean everything and give her a lot more happiness than being judged by the freedom fighters for her mistakes. But again, show, don't tell. We never see Sally interacting with Fiona like she's not to be trusted after that issue and before this. So this comes completely out of nowhere if you don't look between the lines. This whole thing about her feeling like she doesn't belong and isn't really accepted with the heroes would have been much better foreshadowed if we got to see Sally interacting with her more to further emphasize that point. She mistreated Tails with the justification that she wanted to give him the lesson she learned. She thought she could count on the freedom fighters to make her feel loved and supported, but Sally proved she can't expect them to like her for who she was. Her trust issues went from bubbling at the surface there to exploding out of her as she tries to justify her actions. Chances are, from the way Sally was treating her and Sonic's displeasure with her, Fiona thought she was on her way out anyways. And if she didn't leave on her own, she'd be abandoned and kicked out by Sally regardless, and be betrayed and abandoned by the last group of loved ones she has left. And obviously, as someone with abandonment issues, she can't handle that again. So she got into a mentality of ditch them before they ditch me, and went with Scourge as a preemptive strike. But is she gonna explain any of that? No, that'd be interesting, and give her depth. Instead, she makes it all vague, giving a message of how she has trust issues and thinks Tails should learn to not be so idealistic for his own good. Maybe a part of her was trying to help him with that message, feeling ashamed and saying, "You shouldn't trust me anymore," and trying to detach him from her completely. Bottom line is, she thinks she's doing the harsh but justified thing, getting Tails to give up on her, but she'll probably regret it the night after. She's caught between a rock and a hard place, and either way, a part of her would feel like she's making a big mistake, so she wants to get the decision officially made as soon as possible to get it over with. Sonic immediately puts his hands on Tails' shoulders, saying, "Tails, buddy?" showing compassion for him, and then runs at her angrily. She says, "You're my prime example. Or did you forget you left me imprisoned?" Her prime example of how she can't count on anybody, because she couldn't count on him to go find her and save her. Of course, this is a human mind working illogically based on nothing but emotions, since logically she should know that he had no way of finding her. But it does make sense that she takes that being let down as an example of why she can only count on herself. Never mind the fact that she's clearly counting on Scourge to be supportive and open-minded of her as a new fun-loving boyfriend, but she's too proud trying to follow that message of independence to admit that she sucks at following her own advice, because it's advice that she can't fully believe in. That independence praising is something Scourge and Fiona have in common. She probably sees Scourge as a free spirit who inspiringly does what he wants and no one else. Scourge naturally attacks Sonic, trying to prevent him from crashing into Fiona at the speed of sound and potentially murdering her, and then proves himself even more by explaining, "Don't get me wrong, Wuss, as much as I like messing with you, I think I actually like Fiona." Just like I said earlier, and again, he couldn't have started this just to mess with Sonic because she wasn't dating him yet. He then says stupidly that all the girls in this dimension are evil from the get-go. Somehow I doubt that. I mean, if every single female of the human race was born a psychopath, civilized society wouldn't really be able to show up. Like, that's half the population. They wouldn't really try to be good mothers, for one. Not to mention he's implying that every girl in Mobius is good as the reverse to that. But it'd make more sense for most people to be neutral, selfish without being outright evil, meaning that their reverse morality counterparts would be basically the same. So I doubt they were literally born evil. All of them. That's psychologically impossible, especially on such a grand scale. Unless Anti-Mobius brainwashes them into it with magical brainwashing ways, and that was the case. With Scourge being a bad boy, he'd have nothing to be proud of because he's only like that from being brainwashed. Instead, the people there are more likely to have just had a harsh upbringing making them jerks. Then he explains that Fiona chooses to be, and that is hot. Again, he doesn't actually elaborate on this, although it can be forgiven with him because he's in the middle of a fight and he's not exactly the most articulate speaker, and explaining more of why he loves Fiona would make him look like a softie. I think it's more that she's a nice person to him, who isn't afraid to join in on the fun. She's good and open-minded, the perfect combination to him. With Alicia, we saw her attack him once just to have a challenging fight. Fiona's like the perfect woman to him, where he can have his cake and eat it too. She's one of the normal nice girls that would normally never date him, but she does. When any other girl twisted enough to want to be with him would either be a jerk in general and make him call her a pain, or leave him like Rouge because even they have standards. Then after Scourge merely quick steps to dodge Sonic's spin dash, a spin dash that logically should have sliced him apart, but whatever. He explains while most of him is under shadow that's really dark and makes no sense to be there in-universe, that one bad day and Sonic will be just like him. One, he's cynical, so it makes perfect sense he'd assume the worst in Sonic. And two, he's kinda right. Sonic could snap if something got him mad enough. Remember when Sonic almost murdered a soldier with the sword of acorns when he thought that guy killed his Uncle Chuck? What if he actually did and that led him down a slippery slope because he got his first time out of the way? I mean, based on how all his friends are heroes who make him ashamed and he grew up around heroes, it's more likely he'd feel crushed with guilt instead, especially since that soldier was merely brainwashed and didn't deserve it. But what if getting that out of the way made him more likely to try to justify doing it again because he has targets that actually deserve it after him? He has a fragile ego, so he'd want to feel better about himself and stop hating himself for what he did, after all. And being treated with discomfort and thus pushed away by his friends might get him detached from and resentful of them, wanting to rebel against them more. Of course, it'd be way more likely that Sonic would never do it again, though. But Scourge doesn't know that because he doesn't understand the sheer impact that being in a hero environment has had on Sonic's life, and the sheer influence of his conscience as a result. Sonic trips Scourge, and then Smurfs looking unlikably smug while explaining the real reason for why he disapproves of Scourge. He says, it's because all it would take is a bit of selflessness, a little bit of decency, and you'd be just like me. And that reaction from Scourge proves that he has depths. Instead of laughing him off, or getting annoyed and offended, how does he react? By looking scared and stunned at considering it. This is not the reaction of someone who's never done anything good before. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to even perceive the idea that he'd do something nice, and would never believe that it would happen. This is the reaction of someone who has shown selflessness. In fact, a lot of selflessness. Since just one time wouldn't be enough to make him terrified that even his bad boy reputation doesn't make him unique from Sonic. And the only person I can imagine he'd show such decency and selflessness to would be Miles. Miles is Tails' equivalent, and therefore Scourge's own version of his little brother and best friend, and he was especially surprised and disappointed in him in particular leaving him, because he considered him to be his sidekick. He had the closest bond with him out of anyone else. There had to be a reason that Miles and him became best friends, instead of Miles avoiding him like the plague. You'd think if Scourge was literally the exact opposite to Sonic evil in every way, he would have bullied Miles for having two tails, as the contrast to Sonic accepting Tails for it. But instead, he must have been just as accepting of what made him special to convince him to trust him in the first place. But are they going to elaborate on the kinds of nice things that Scourge did? Show a panel or two of him ruffling Miles' hair and telling him he liked him for who he was? No, of course not. Because that would be good writing and add depth to his character. Instead, we have to keep everything strictly from Sonic's point of view, which means everything's a mystery. Translation: plot holes and missed opportunities up the ass. What Sonic said is going to haunt him, but we'll never know exactly why. Scourge has based his whole sense of worth after meeting Sonic on being the most unique Sonic of all, since he's the only one who's evil. And now it's made obvious to him that even with a new look, his personality is still too similar to him, and he'll do everything he can to try to prove Sonic wrong. Fiona attacked Sonic before Scourge could say anything interesting, when it would have been more fascinating to see what would happen after that. She then tells Sonic that the way Sonic holds back makes him weak, and it's all about survival of the fittest. Honestly, she's got a good point. I can see why she'd think this. It would even fit in her hatred of Robotnik from childhood. In her mindset, if Sonic was really not weak and could be counted on, he would have killed Robotnik and Eggman both and freed the world much more effectively. Instead, he holds back, and is a lot less effective as a hero because he postpones his victory by who knows how long. Her argument isn't an argument against heroism by itself, it's against holding back, which Scourge does all the time, by the way. Remember how many times I said that Scourge held back in Sonic Super Special Issue 10? For example, when Pac tried to throw a knife at him, he didn't kill him immediately. Amy shows up, furious with Fiona, because she was nearby apparently, and Tails says, "I can't hurt you, Fiona, but I don't care about you, Scourge." Scourge then decides, acting all casual, that he's had his fun, rather than trying to fight them. And Fiona agrees to go with them into the warp ring, saying, "Let's," causing Amy to insult her bodysuit, which looked perfectly fine. It was better than her going around with no clothes on. Was that supposed to be echoing what the fans thought? Sonic asks Tails as they all stand in a green void because the artist got lazy, "How are you holding up, bud?" And Tails has another great line, saying sadly, I feel awful," rubbing his cheek. Tails then says that Fiona was wrong because he knows he can always count on the Freedom Fighters. Yeah, he can. If only she had explained herself more, that she was talking more about herself. Tails says sadly with a forced smile that he wants to go see his mother for comfort, and after Antoine is told what Fiona did, he says he's going to do something he should have done a long time ago, while looking angry and menacing. I doubt this will lead to anything badass because he's not competent enough to be allowed to be. So is the next story going to elaborate on what Scourge's secret date was like? No, of course not. Instead, it's about Julie Sue. Talk about distracted. Julie wakes up Amy, telling her that she should be used to getting up this early by now, and reminds her for the sake of the audience that Amy came to her for personal training. Then there's more stilted dialogue where she says just for the sake of the audience that the usual is to walk all around Knothole and then back to Freedom HQ. And this is supposed to make her more competent how exactly? Amy sleepily heads for the river and falls in, and fortunately she doesn't drown, but instead is immediately helped out by Julie. It's nice that the two are having a story together, them being kind of friends, especially fitting since they both have pink hair. Amy complains about not being allowed to change clothes first, and Julie says, "Do you think Robotnik would let you change your wardrobe?" The two balance on top of long wooden poles and do combat practice. Then I'm promptly bored as Amy acts predictable, like a bad fanfiction, saying that she wants to be the best freedom fighter ever for Sonic. And this whole story feels like a waste of time. This issue was by Ian Flynn, and the main story was dedicated to Fiona officially leaving with Scourge. I'd like to point out that in the Other M band comic that Ian Flynn made, from what I've heard, he portrayed Fiona as an awesome ass-kicking badass, and one of the heroes. So he clearly likes the character. So why did he turn her into this? Well, the answer is the fans. He knew the fans thought Fiona was just some dumb brainless beauty that didn't deserve to be with the freedom fighters. So to please the fans, not necessarily himself, he sacrificed her by making her much more interesting by being Scourge's girlfriend. So honestly, I prefer her this way. The problem is the way it was handled with nothing but missed opportunities and shallow characterization, all for the sake of having it be a plot twist. They could have had Fiona elaborate a lot more on why she's making this decision and feeling justified in it, instead of looking like she was replaced with an evil doppelganger for all the resemblance she shares to the old her. And Scourge proves he has shown decency and selflessness by reacting with fear and insecurity to Sonic letting it get to him. But in the biggest missed opportunity of all, we don't get to see what those good things he did were. We could have removed the pointless backup story entirely and had more than enough comic space to make the main story not feel so confusing and rushed. We could have seen panels of flashbacks showing Scourge being all brotherly with Miles, comforting him about being bullied and stuff, and beating up his bullies way more viciously than Sonic ever would. And we could have seen Fiona explain how Sally made her feel like she didn't belong in the Freedom Fighters anymore. Instead, the two villains aren't given enough deaths, and Fiona's actions, criminal past or not, seem really jarring. You'd think someone who hates Eggman wouldn't choose to stop trying to spite him and dedicating her life to making him miserable. As a freedom fighter, Fiona wasn't really that useful from what little we got to see of her being one, because she's immortal. She doesn't have any special powers. Let's see, she gave Sonic medical attention, which anyone could have done, distracted Bean to get him off Sonic's head, talked Bark out of trying to win a fight he would have lost anyways, charged in with her friends to get Scourge and Rouge away, fought Drago, and gave up what she learned about Rouge to get her to talk about Finitivis. Aside from maybe the Bean part, nothing she did as far as we know was necessary. It looks like they would have been fine if she had never been born. But of course that's not fair to assume because due to a time skip we never got to know the exact nature of her contribution to the heroes. We don't know everything she did to help. And in fact the vast majority of it is unknown. I thought I'd at least get to see a short story about when she decided to join the Freedom Fighters and learn when exactly she joined, but I didn't. And I didn't get to see her having many friendship moments making her feel like she's actually in that close-knit group of friends. They really didn't give a shit about this character. It feels like they just put her into the Freedom Fighters on a whim because, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if that girl Sonic left behind was on a few missions with them? She doesn't even have any original skills. She does wiring stuff like Rotor would. She's an intellectual, which is never helpful. For the most part, anyone could have done the things we saw her do. Well, except for these times anyways. Half of the time she was necessary, but would anyone have died or had to go to the hospital without her? We'll never know. What I do know is, she's more interesting and unique as Scourge's girlfriend. The problem now is that she's unlikable, because we don't get to see as much of the good and interesting traits she had before him, do we? Her nice side, her compassionate side, how much does she look sad or show her intellectual side around him? Is she just gonna be a paper-thin villainess whose only trait is manipulatingness and trust issues now? It would be great if we saw her being the same basic person but with Scourge. showing him compassion and caution, her intelligent side, and being optimistic and fun-loving around him. I prefer her being with him as a couple. At least the two have similar personalities, which is more than can be said for Sonic and Sally. But they could have done this whole thing a lot better. As for the second story, there's really nothing to say. It's nice that Julie is training Amy, but not much comes out of it for them friend-wise. And it just serves to solidify Amy's transformation to the one-dimensional Sonic-obsessed character she's in the games, when she was never like that before Ian Flynn showed up. Granted, she was more boring and generic that way, being treated like just any other girl. But now Sonic has no respect for her at all. And I can see why. It's like her character development to a competent character has been completely undermined. Really, the story would have served much better as extra comic space for the main story, actually elaborating on things. Or better yet, it should have been a story about how Fiona's actual time with Scourge was like, instead of us only seeing Sonic's perspective and missing out on more than half the story. Ultimately, this was the first issue of Flynn that annoyed me. The lack of elaboration on Fiona's reasoning and motives made it feel clumsily handled, coming out of nowhere just for the sake of being a Merlina-esque crazy plot twist. Even if she did have a criminal past, she was a fish out of water compared to the pure righteous heroes, not being allowed to use a gun when she wanted to, for example. But foreshadowing isn't the issue. A lack of a sympathetic motive and proper reasoning is. In real life, people talk to each other and explain why they think the way they do and act the way they do to try to make themselves look in the right. But instead, everything's too vague. When you'd think Fiona would be eager to vent about Sally starting her down the slippery slope and make her feel like an outcast who doesn't belong. Unless she was scared deep down that if she actually explained her motive, she'd get talked out of it. Maybe she would. We don't know. But ultimately, no, to my surprise, it wasn't just Sally's fault that she left. It was Scourge. Everything would have been fine if Scourge hadn't convinced her to start cheating with him. Because we never actually see Sally being judgmental of her after that one time. God, this was mishandled.